welcome to the Momversation Club, the podcast born out of the idea that every mum deserves a tribe. I'm Claire Strong.
And I'm Christina Struckmeyer. We're two moms just like you, navigating the chaotic, challenging, and often isolating world of motherhood.
Now, it's said that it takes a village to raise a child, but we want to know, where the F is that village?
It's a question that resonates with so many of us who find ourselves raising children, managing careers, and trying to maintain our own identities, often with a sense of isolation.
But we're here to remind you that you're not alone. The Momversation Club is your tribe, your village, a place where you feel valued, appreciated, and understood.
We believe that by sharing our own experiences, successes, and struggles, we can create a virtual village for all you amazing mamas out there.
So join us every week for a real, raw, and relatable discussion about all aspects of being a mum, including the things you just can't talk about to anyone else.
So if you've ever asked yourself where the F is the village, then you've found your tribe. So let's get into it. Good morning, everyone. We are so excited to have a guest on today's podcast. Today, we are speaking with Meghan Giampaoli, and she is an international board certified lactation consultant, which is super long, but you guys may recognize the acronym IBCLC, which means she knows a lot about breastfeeding and all types of things in that nature. She's also a prenatal nutrition educator and owner of Milk and Motherhood Lactation. Additionally, she's kind of a good friend of mine, both online and IRL, and she's a wonderful resource. Claire and I have been getting used to her content online, right, Claire?
Oh my gosh, Meghan, I'm so excited to meet you. I'm like a super fan of yours. If you haven't seen Meghan's stuff, please check her out because her videos are they're so fantastic. They're informational and informative, but you've just got such a lovely way about you, Meghan. And I love the props you use. I hope you brought them along because I want to see them.
Yes. So Meghan's a wonderful resource for one-on-one clients, like all through the country. She's also on social, like we mentioned. You can find a lot of informative content. We'll link all the things. But without further ado, let's introduce Miss Meghan. Hello, Meghan.
Hello. Good
Hi, Meghan. I'm loving
We are so excited to have you.
We are. I'm loving the green scrubs, by the way.
Thank you.
And you just shared a cute story, didn't you? Who chooses what color scrubs you wear?
My 3-year-old. Every single time consult, she picks exactly what color I wear for the day. So fun to keep her involved too.
Oh my gosh, I love it. Well, I mean, let's get into it because breastfeeding, my gosh, that's a huge subject for all new mums, whether to even breastfeed or not, to start with. I mean, talk to us a little bit about that.
Absolutely. So typically what I do is I help families from prenatal all the way through weaning. For my own self, I struggled with my journey with my first child. And so that kind of led the way, and I'll kind of dig deeper a little bit into that in a bit. And then that allowed me to pursue the passion that I have for lactation. So I typically see families both in home and also through telemedicine all the way across the world. So I've helped families in Africa and I've helped families here in the United States. So it's pretty neat to be able to have technology to be able to serve families throughout the world.
So cool. So cool. I love that, Meghan. So you said that you're going to hint to it, but I would love to hear, because I'm always so curious. We bring on different guests and it's so fun to hear how they got into that space and why they chose that path for their career. So tell us a little bit about what got you into the breastfeeding education space, the lactation consultant space.
Absolutely. So I was a teacher for 7 years. I actually was an adapted PE specialist. So I worked with students with mod severe disabilities while I was new to having my own family. My daughter and I, when I was pregnant with her, I never took a breastfeeding class. I just kind of said, okay, I want to breastfeed. Let's do it. In the hospital, I honestly didn't have a lot of support. I had somebody who is also a lactation consultant come in and put the baby on my boob and say, smash your boob like this. Here it is. Baby's latched. Congratulations. Have any questions? And then they said, oh, here's this nipple shield. Go put that on because you have a flat nipple and baby will latch. And I'm like, oh, okay, sounds great. So when I got home, I had no idea how to even latch my own baby. I was struggling. And by the grace of God and a whole lot of support from my mom, I was able to nurse with a nipple shield for the next 8 weeks, and that saved our breastfeeding journey. But at some point, I'm like, okay, I need to figure this out. And so I, thankfully with her as well, just kind of took off the nipple shield, tried to latch her, and everything went smoothly from there on out. We had a lot of oral dysfunction that was going on in her mouth that at the time I had no idea was even a thing. Because of the things that I didn't know and chose to implement in my own journey, I created this massive oversupply, which in the long run ended up being a blessing because I was able to donate breast milk. I think to this date, and the majority of it was with my daughter, I've donated about 15,000 ounces of breast milk for family.
That's so much.
Yeah, it's wild. From a formal donation at a milk bank through Austin, I would ship 500, 600, 800 ounces of milk twice a month to Texas. And then I also had a local family that I donated to, both for their first baby as well as their twins this time. So it has been a wild journey, and I am so thankful. My daughter unfortunately had gotten sick in 2021, and I had to stay home with her for about 5 weeks. And at the time, again, I was a teacher. And so my mom was like, hey, I saw this thing online that you could become a breastfeeding counselor. Why don't you take this class? And I was like, okay, sure, might as well. What is it? It's like 45 hours. You might as well do it. Signed up for this class. I immediately paused. I'm like, okay, imposter syndrome. This is not what I do. I just am breastfeeding my own kid. I've had my own struggles. I was really nervous. No kidding. Like an hour later, I got a text message from an acquaintance that just said, hey, I saw you were donating all this breast milk. I am struggling with this breastfeeding stuff. Do you have any advice to give? And I kind of helped her out through text messages. We went back and forth, hopped on a video call. And then she was like, hey, have you ever thought about becoming a lactation consultant? I had told nobody that I even signed up for the class except for my mom. My husband didn't even know that I signed up yet for it. And so I'm like, wow, I just started crying. I'm like, okay, God, I see you. This is what I meant to be doing. And then from there on out, every single step of the way has just truly laid itself out, from where I got my clinical hours at the hospital, to building my private practice as a breastfeeding counselor, to taking my board exams this last September and passing my board exams, and having 2 job opportunities immediately lined up from there. So it's a very big blessing, and it's crazy how it all turned out, but I am so very thankful.
Oh my gosh. What an amazing story. And it's clearly something you were called to do, Meghan. I can tell how passionate you are about it, which is just fantastic. Just before we move on, you mentioned, you sound like a milk producing machine there. Those are impressive quantities, Meghan. But you mentioned donating milk. Now, that's something I've never heard of before. Maybe, I'm from the UK. I'd never heard of such a thing. So maybe it's more common here. I don't know. But if there are any mums out there who don't know about that, tell us a little bit more about donor milk.
Absolutely. So I had mentioned that with my first, I was just flying by the seat of my pants. I had no idea what I was doing. I just was trying to feed my baby, and if I got extra milk, it was really exciting. What I didn't know was the things that I was doing was setting my body up for this massive oversupply. So I dealt with a lot of mastitis, clogged ducts, super engorgement all the time. I would feed on one side and I'd have to pump the other side. I didn't realize that when I was doing that, I was telling my body to make more milk, which in the long run, I now have learned with my second baby, although we are prone to making more milk with more babies that we have because we get more milk making tissue with each pregnancy, I've learned to modify how I feed my babies to make sure that doesn't happen. But with that oversupply, you have 2 options. You can either do a formal donation center through a milk bank, which are all throughout the United States and also a lot of countries as well. I think Brazil has one of the highest formal milk bank operations, I would say, which is really exciting. And other countries are starting to get more into it. And basically the route for a formal donation is you have to go through about a 2-month process of getting approved as a milk donor. They do blood work. They talk to your physician. They talk to baby's physician. They make sure you're up to date on all the things that need to be up to date with in terms of shots, and making sure that you have any medications that you're using that are approved for transferring within the milk process, because all of that milk typically goes to fragile babies. They take that milk, they pasteurize it, and then they send it out in small amounts to hospitals, to NICUs. And there are some banks that allow people to purchase milk from with a very hefty cost and price tag. On our end, it is, as a milk donor, it doesn't cost you anything. You just pump your milk, express your milk, however you do, put it in a container frozen, and you ship it out. They pasteurize it, and then they disperse it out to recipients that need it.
Wow.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. And then there's an informal donation, which is, I feel like, more common here, where you just say, hey, a lot of people do it on like Facebook posts. They're like, hey, I have 100 extra ounces of breast milk. Can anybody use it? So if you're a part of any like the local mom groups, you'll see a lot of moms that will do that. There's also like Mother's Milk for Mothers, I think, or Mother's Milk for Babies might be what it's called. And it's typically like another Facebook group, and you can check on there if there's anybody locally that may have extra milk. And so, of course, I always tell everybody, like, it's important to know your recipient, like who you're getting milk from. You want to know the history of like what medications they're on, what the history is with their baby. Is their baby around the same age as your baby? So there is a little bit more things that I would caution when it comes to like an informal milk opportunity compared to like a formal milk bank. But for many families, it is a huge blessing, especially if mom has low supply or has medications that they might be taking, such as like a chemo medication that they can't physically breastfeed because they're the baby.
Yeah, I mean, getting back to the beginning of your story about like where you were when you first had, your first baby and what that felt like. I think that so many times, every mama, like I know Claire and I have had this experience. The baby is like placed in your arms and you're like, oh, what now? Like, this is mine.
Yeah.
And then there's these things that you think that are going to be such like a natural thing for you or are going to be just like instinct. And sometimes that happens and sometimes it doesn't, but that's such a fragile state for your mental health. And it is important that you get off on the right foot when it comes to breastfeeding, because there can be things that are easy to solve, problem solving. And I had the same experience as you. Like I was in what's called a baby positive environment. Like I birthed at a place that was very pro breastfeeding.
Baby friendly.
What's it called?
A baby friendly hospital.
Oh.
Yes.
Yeah.
I hadn't heard of that term before, Christina.
Yeah, and what qualifies that? Do you know that, Megan? Like, was that something you can speak to real quick?
Yeah, so a baby-friendly hospital is a designation that happens. It is a long, formal process that the hospital has to go through, and it's kind of like an elite recognition that the hospital gets. And with that recognition, they have to recertify. I believe it's every 5 years, but their numbers, like the initiation rate for breastfeeding, has to be at a specific, like 80% level, I believe, as well as when baby leaves the hospital, the purpose of them, if they do receive formula, what was the reasoning behind it? Was it medically required? And they kind of have to go through like a whole spiel of like tracking everything in order to like keep with that designation. It's a very hard process, but the neat thing is all the nursing staff is trained in breastfeeding for about 20 hours worth of training, which is really neat.
Yeah.
Otherwise, the nurses.
That's the thing. I had really good support in the hospital with a lactation consultant coming in, and like there was a lot of information coming at me. But even so, that those first weeks, you're just like processing this massive thing that happened to you. There's so much new stuff coming at you. It's hard to kind of latch onto that information. And then if there's any trouble whatsoever, there can be a lot of like stuff that you put on yourself, and the struggles that happen, they're very personal. Claire, I know you've experienced breastfeeding differently, but for me, with my two girls, my first one, I gave up on breastfeeding after just a couple days. It was just really difficult. I wasn't getting the latch right. She was screaming. It was a lot of tension, a lot of lack of support. And I just stopped and said, go grab the formula, which again, fed is best, like no knocking on the formula. I've used formula with both my girls. But I really had a desire to breastfeed with both of them. And the second one, I got support, and it was night and day. I mean, did you have any support? I know your birthing experience is different, Claire, in the UK. What did that look like for you?
So, yeah, you actually touched upon it earlier, Megan. So with both of my girls, someone is in the hospital, an expert, to give you some preliminary tips. But then, particularly with your first, when you don't know what you're doing, they came in, they latched the baby on, they talked about a rugby ball technique. That's the technique they talk about in England. Yeah. And so apparently I have good nipples for breastfeeding. So whatever that means. So I'll take it. So apparently my nipples were good, and the baby was latching well. However, when you're discharged a couple of days later and you're back at home, you are on your own. And actually, correct me if I'm wrong, Meghan, because I know you're the expert here, but your real, the proper milk doesn't come in initially anyway. It's like there's a different milk, isn't there, that comes in initially, and then after maybe a couple of days. And so by the time I'd gone home on my own, not knowing anything about breastfeeding really, I became incredibly engorged. I was really, really struggling. I had a fever, all the symptoms of mastitis, and there was no one to help me. So I was Googling, what to do. I had my husband at the time go and get me a cabbage. Apparently cabbage leaves are good for mastitis. So I think they did work, actually. So I would recommend cabbage leaves. But I was on my own. And, it was very much, okay, you're discharged from the hospital. You figure it out. And so I want to know, the work that you do, Meghan, how do you make sure that women aren't in that situation? Because when you're back home and you don't have the medical staff on hand, it seems to be just down to you as the mom.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is a huge key factor in a lot of families. So that's why I chose the pathway as a private practice compared to working in the hospital setting. I think in the hospital setting, families have so much support, but when they go home, they truly, at least that's how I felt like I was just trying to stay above float. I didn't even know that there were opportunities for support. Especially with my first, I just was like, okay, I want to feed milk as much as I can. Let's just do this. Which as for my private practice, I go and see families in their homes. They don't come to an office. They don't have to leave. I go to them so that they have that immediate support and care once they come home. Because you are right. Your milk is typically in a colostrum state when you are discharged from the hospital, and your milk doesn't begin to transition towards a more mature milk until day 3, day 4, day 5. Some moms even day 6 and day 7. So when we have our milk transition, you're right. You wake up and you're like, oh my gosh, my boobs are like Dolly Parton, or they feel like bowling balls.
Oh yeah, yeah.
What do I do with these things? And they're trying to latch a baby, and a baby feels like they're trying to latch onto a bowling ball because there's so much edema in the breast, and the nipple doesn't protrude like it used to before all that swelling. So that is why I go into homes and do in-home care, because you're right. There is not a lot of support. And thankfully, we do have IBCLCs who have chosen the route as a private practice to be able to meet families where they're at. And also not have the stress of having to leave your house. Okay, we all know how hard it is to get yourself ready and get your baby ready and get any other.
Oh, yeah.
So to not have that is wonderful.
Yeah. And I'll share, the reason Meghan was someone I thought of for this podcast is Meghan, I was one of her first customers.
Oh, wow.
I had such a hard time with my second baby, and thankfully, Meghan is a family friend, and we knew her as someone who was trustworthy. And I think seeing her online, seeing her information, seeing that she was a source of knowledge and non-judgment too, which is important, like having someone you feel comfortable with going into your home, it really helped me bring her in. And I will say, as a mom, even a second time mom, because I think every baby is so different, it's such a heightened, sensitive space. You feel very vulnerable. You're literally touched out. Everything's raw, like you're wearing a diaper. It's a whole thing. And so having someone come into your home and even just acknowledge hey, this is hard. I remember Meghan coming into my home as a professional and also, a friend, and saying, hey, you're doing a great job. And sometimes we need to hear that. It's just such a, you leave the hospital, you're expected to know all the things.
Yep.
If you don't know the things, you got to Google or ask your mom or something.
Yeah.
There's some stuff you can't know. And it's hard when you're in that space to know you're doing a good job. So having someone where you don't feel like I wasn't self-conscious about bringing my boob out because I felt like you'd seen it all. It's like going to a gynecologist.
Yeah.
Yes.
I wasn't self-conscious, and you would ask, you were very careful about like, can I touch here, and asking for informed consent. And it wasn't this like grab hold rugby thing like in the hospital. It was like, hey, I'm seeing this, maybe try this, and have you explored maybe this position? And also, just not to ramble on, but there's so much other mental things that you have to keep track of when you're in that breastfeeding journey, like storage of your milk and like making sure you have the right bottles if you're doing, bottle feeding alongside and all this stuff. So anyways, all that to say is, Meghan, I love how you make people feel comfortable both online and in real life. Is that intentional? Like, is that something you cultivate to make sure people feel that lack of judgment and that safety with you?
Yeah, to be honest, I feel like I put a big emphasis is I never want a mom to feel the way that I did after my first baby. I never want them to feel like they don't have that support and that when I leave, they don't know how to do it because that's how I felt. And so I put a very big emphasis on telling all of my clients, when I leave, I want you to go feeling comfortable that you can do it on your own without me. I want to teach you how to hold your breast appropriately. That is best for your baby because we can go online and say, oh yeah, this is how you sandwich your breast and this is how you hold it. But is that best for your breast? We're all different sizes. Our babies' mouths are all the same or all different sizes as well. So it's important to be able to make that specific to the family. And then the other thing that I tell moms is like, text me anytime. I don't care if it's 2:00 in the morning, 4:00 in the morning. I never want you to feel alone in the process. And I also want you to know that I'm probably going to be awake with my own kids at some point. Back and we're going through this together.
Oh my gosh, Meghan, where were you when I had my two girls? Every mum needs a Meghan. So we mentioned a few minutes ago about, the first couple of days usually are the worst. And Christina, you said that's when you had your first, that's when you quit because it just got too much. I remember having the exact same thoughts. This is too painful. It's not working. The baby's still hungry. It sounds like, what's going on? Should I go into formula? Now, luckily for me, it turned around fairly quickly within a space of a day or two. And then I was okay. But I know of a lot of women who wanted to try breastfeeding, but quit after a couple of days because of those things. It was too painful. Baby is just crying all the time. So what support do you offer to women like that, particularly a few days in when it's just getting all too much?
Yeah, I find that if I am seeing pain, like if I tell everybody, if you're getting pain with latching, if you're getting pain with pumping, if you're getting nipple damage, something is not right. And you need a professional to be able to find the root cause of that. Is it some kind of oral dysfunction? Is it something as simple as babies not opening their mouth wide enough and we need to trigger that reflex for them to open their mouth wide enough? Or is it something as simple as, hey, you just need to move your hand in a different position because you're sandwiching your breast this way versus like a hamburger so your baby can't put it in their mouth. So I put a big emphasis on finding that root cause, but I tell every family, like, you might feel a little bit of sensitivity the first few days because of our hormones, but if you're getting any kind of damage or your nipple is coming off and looking like a lipstick afterwards, there is something going on that is not right between you and baby. And it is so important though to seek support for that. Whether that's in a telehealth option or if that's in an in-home setting, it's important to find that root cause because you shouldn't be getting pain with breastfeeding. It should be a nice, comfortable thing, which again, I always tell families, you and baby, this is new for both of you. I'm not just treating baby and I'm not just treating you. I'm treating you together because your baby is very independent and they are very individualized to themselves. And so your feeding journey with one can be completely different than it is with a second. So it is really that individualized support for mom and baby and them together as a team.
Yeah, and then knowing, like you said, what is normal slash
Mm.
okay or something that to be expected and what isn't, and like what does that look like? I think that's huge too, because especially now, our podcast means to be a village for most people. We like to cultivate a community, and I know that community is very important to you as well. But sometimes you just don't know, like, is this what everyone's feeling and no one's talking about it? Or is there something going on here that I need a professional? One of the things I love about you is on your website, you talk about, being prepared before the baby comes. How do you help women before baby's here, and like just adjusting those expectations and figuring out, what to look for as far as like signs of things you might need help with?
Absolutely. So I am a huge advocate for prenatal breastfeeding classes. It's not something I personally ever took. And I feel like if I did, I would have been a lot more prepared for my own journey, especially as somebody who wasn't in that field originally. So, and I always preface, like, not every breastfeeding class is the same. Like, you really need a high quality breastfeeding class. And if a class isn't, to be transparent, like 90 minutes to 2 hours, it's probably not going to have enough information to really set you up for success. I do offer a prenatal breastfeeding class. I do both group settings as well as individualized one-on-one with clients. And I feel like it is such an information heavy class. I tell all my moms, like, you are going to hear so much information over these next 2 hours, and you're going to be like, what just even happened? How much am I even going to remember? And then I like to remind them, when baby is here, these are the things you're going to see, and you might not remember them in the minute, but you'll remember later on, like, oh yeah, I remember hearing that. I remember hearing that my baby's going to be awake on night 2 and night 3, and there's nothing wrong with them, that they're a night owl, that baby's cluster feeding, and it's not because I have low milk supply, it's because baby's telling my body to make more milk because they're growing and their tummies are growing at such a rapid rate. So I love to kind of set those expectations for what moms need to look forward to, but also preface with saying, like, hey, your hormones are going to play such a huge role in this. You're going to feel hormonal and emotional. It's really common day 2 to feel like that. And day 3, day 7, 8, 9, you will probably feel very emotional. You will cry and you won't know why. Your sleep is catching up to you from being awake at all hours. Like, I really put a big emphasis on not just the breastfeeding aspect, but also what to expect those first 2 weeks. Because for myself, I had no idea. And so I think being able to set moms up for success in that route helps them be more prepared for their journeys, and to let them know, like, the things that they're experiencing are very normal and what's not normal, and being able to navigate that in a much more independent state for them. And it kind of lets them feel like this sense of confidence, like, oh yeah, I know my baby's going to be awake on night 2 and night 3, so I should probably get a little bit of extra rest because they're going to be tired that first 24 hours, and that's okay.
But Megan, so you just touched upon it there. It's all about confidence. Breastfeeding, certainly for me, was a confidence thing. And had I have known that some things are perfectly normal, maybe some things weren't, and I needed to get help in those areas, I think my journey would have been a lot easier and probably less painful than it was. So what I don't get, because breastfeeding is so complex and emotional and very physically taxing as well, why is there not emphasis placed on this in the lead up to the birth? We know about how to have a successful birth, and we know all these other prenatal things, but not breastfeeding. Why is that? It seems crazy to me.
Oh my gosh, girl. Before you do that, I will tell you, I took one of those baby classes and we spent like almost a whole day learning how to swaddle. And I was like, there are Velcro swaddles these days.
Oh
What I need to
God.
know is like the stuff Megan's talking about.
Yes.
I don't care about a swaddle.
Yes. Oh my gosh, that's funny. But
And I
yeah,
think
it's crazy, Megan. Why do you think this is still the case, that we're not given this prenatal breastfeeding support when it's such a huge part of having a new baby?
to be honest, I truly think it plays a lot in that postpartum role. I think that moms really lack that postpartum support. And at the end of the day, a lot of pediatricians are focused on babies gaining weight, whatever direction that may be, whether they're breastfeeding, whether they're combo feeding, whether they're formula feeding. They want babies to be fed and growing, which I 100% understand and respect that, which is why I support any feeding method. I think that's very important to have that open dialogue with families. Like, I will support you in no matter what aspect you to go down, or in a sense, have to be forced to go down too for whatever reason. But I think that we just really lack that postpartum support overall. And I think that lactation gets bandaged and roped into that as well. It's kind of like, here, slap on this nipple shield, here, put this pump on, here, give this bottle, instead of like, hey, what's the root cause? Why are we struggling?
Totally, like, strap on your bootstraps and get back to work, ma'am. Like, it's just, we just literally treated a human. Can we take 5 seconds to just, like, I'm still a person. Like 5 seconds ago during maternity care, I was seeing you every week and you were checking in on me and making sure I was okay. I was filling out this questionnaire, making sure I wasn't suicidal. And now there's no check-in until 6 weeks later. What the hell? It's crazy to me. But I love what you just said about like the lack of judgment. That's the reason I think a lot of people don't seek out help when it comes to like breastfeeding, because they're like, well, I know for me, I have seeked out help with another lactation consultant. And I felt like there was this raw support when it came to the breastfeeding time. But then when I would mention like I might need to supplement or I'm thinking about doing this, there would be like, well, here's the statistics about why that's a horrible decision and you're a horrible mother. And it was so hard. Like, that's not what she said, but like it was the tone. It was the vibe.
Yeah.
And so it's hard because some moms do want to breastfeed and they get that support and they may need to combo feed. They may need to bring in supplementation of some sort. And I love that you are not judgmental of that. Have you had experience with women who have had that happen in the past, maybe with other babies, and then they come to you and they experience that lack of judgment?
Yeah, I feel like, especially and I hate to like pinpoint out, but I have had a lot of moms like in a hospital setting where they're like, wow, in the hospital, we needed supplementation and this was the route. And this is how my pediatrician told me we needed to do. And this is how I felt. Like, made me feel like I was a failure. Like, I didn't know how to get past that. And just like you said, just kind of encouraging moms and let them not feel that guilt. I feel like we have so much guilt and shame that is wrapped up in motherhood, and breastfeeding is not something that comes natural. And I like to joke, but like, if a mom tells you they breastfed and it was the easiest thing in the world, they're either lying to you or they are a unicorn, because it truly is.
Who are these women?
Like, it takes a lot of learning, and there are so many things that add up to it, that like, if there's an oral dysfunction, unfortunately, we have a lot of pediatricians that don't believe that tongue mobility plays a role in lactation, which is really interesting because we have so much research that tells us otherwise in the long run for adulthood. So yeah, it can be a slippery slope, because even within my own work, I have to be mindful of what advice somebody has been given from another provider, as well as another lactation consultant, but also be able to shape the conversation so that parents understand, this is why I'm recommending the things that I'm recommending, and I want to meet you where you're at. And if your goal is to combo feed, you want to feed breast milk and nurse during the day, but you want to provide formula at nighttime, I respect that and I understand. And I think that sometimes, unfortunately, kind of like in our postpartum world, it's looked down upon and adds some shame for the families, when reality is it doesn't need to. Obviously, there is benefits to breastfeeding, and I will always support that. And I always will say breastfeeding for most is the most ideal form of milk for babies. But there are some situations where I would say absolutely not. This mom should not be giving breast milk to their baby because it is unsafe for them for other maternal factors. So I think just having the understanding of that too.
So great. Well, Meghan, I know I could talk to you all day about breastfeeding.
I
Like,
know,
literally,
it's
I
such
feel like I'm learning so much.
I know. I'm loving this too.
So before we wrap up, I would love to hear, just like for those listening, maybe you're going into having another baby and you do want to try breastfeeding again, or maybe you have had stuff in the past. What are like 3 common issues that you see across the board as like a common problem with breastfeeding that people would come to you for?
Yeah, great question. I feel like one of the first things that I see is painful latch. Like, if a mom is My nipples are bleeding. They are cracked. They are damaged. I just powered through. And now sometimes I have mastitis because there's a breast infection going on. I find that that's really common for a lot of people, and they just expect, oh, well, it just hurts. It's supposed to hurt. No, breastfeeding should not hurt. So I feel like that's one really common thing that I see. I also asked on my social accounts to ask them, like, hey, what is something that you've struggled with? And another big one is oral dysfunction and tongue ties and lip ties and buccal ties, and knowing how to navigate that. And it's important to understand not all tongue ties need to be released. There are things that we can do, such as navigating tension within the body before even looking to do a release, and being able to navigate how to work with the compensations that are going on within the body before looking at a type of revision. And I will say I work in a dentist office on Mondays that specializes in releases. But it is important to understand that everything starts within the mouth, but it affects the whole rest of the body. So a lot of times if a mom's feeding, they're like, oh, they feed great on the right side, but this left side is really painful. And we see a lot of tension within the body because babies are compensating by lifting a shoulder on this side. So they're elongating the muscles over here and shortening over here. So it's painful when they feed on the opposite side. So I find that a lot of oral dysfunction is a really common thing that families go through. And then the other thing is, I feel like a lot of families they struggle with knowing how much baby is getting and what are the signs that baby is getting enough. And am I providing enough for them? Are they having appropriate output? Is their growth appropriate? And I think that really is an important time to understand what baby's needs are and what are signs for dehydration, what growth they're on for their chart. Are they hitting their milestones? And that truly is a conversation that you can have with your pediatrician or an IBCLC or another lactation provider.
And I've got one last question before we let you go, Meghan. What advice would you give to partners who may be trying to support their wife, their girlfriend during breastfeeding? What can they do to be useful in this situation?
Yeah, wonderful question. I think one of the biggest things is be a listening ear and be encouraging to moms, because we are hard on ourselves and we don't understand the emotions that we're feeling, especially those first 2 weeks and sometimes even beyond that. Be a listening ear. If a mom says, hey, I just need to go shower for 5 minutes and have some quiet time, be receptive to that and know, okay, yeah, I can do that. And it really isn't much of a task for you to hold baby while mom goes and does that. And I think the other thing that is really important for partners to understand is that mom is learning and that it is going to be a bit of a learning curve, and to offer additional support. Hey, do you need me to bring you something to eat? Hey, do you need me to go wash your pump parts for you or go wash your haka for you? Or what can I do to help? Sometimes just asking for help allows the mom to be able to say, hey, yep, this is what I need. And I think that that would be the most beneficial for most partners.
I love that. I remember the first baby, I did not have a lot of support from anyone, like really, including my partner at the time. And the second baby, having a supportive husband, just be there and do the things that they cannot do, but the things that they can do, they jump in. Was so helpful, and doing it without being asked was really nice. I remember when my youngest was little, and I was breastfeeding every 2 hours, and we actually had a really specific like structure to breastfeeding because her weight was not picking up. And I just felt like a milk cow. I remember being like, there's a song called Bitch, I'm a Cow from Doja Cat. And I was like, this is my theme song. Like, I was like, I'm pumping, I'm breastfeeding, I'm pumping. And so I was like always attached to something, and it felt like I was just so overwhelmed. And I remember like walking to my breastfeeding chair, and Alex, my husband, had stacked a bunch of granola bars on top of the cart, and there was like water bottles and those little packets that you stick in your water bottles to flavor it. And then it was that extra thing of like, I see you, I'm helping, you're a rock star. And I think as mom friends, like we can do that. Like if you know that you have a friend who's entering breastfeeding or is planning on breastfeeding, or honestly just being a mom for the first time, maybe make some muffins, bring by some things that are, snack that, because oftentimes I remember being like, trying to breastfeed and feed myself at the same time. It was difficult. So I love that. Doing things, it sounds like, that maybe they can't do, but can do to help you, like an assist.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Because I feel like a lot of dads are like, there's nothing I can do. She's breastfeeding. And you're right. You can't necessarily nurse the baby, but you can go change the diaper for baby so mom can eat something. Or you can hold baby and rock them to sleep while mom is going to take a shower. And I think it's hard for dads because I don't think they connect the same way with babies until babies are so much older and where they're getting that feedback too, which I think is hard. So I always like to tell families like, hey, you can do some infant massage with your baby so dad can be connected. You can do some skin to skin. If you want to feel a part of the process, you can help hand express mom if she needs it. Like there are things that you can do to help.
Yeah. And even the solidarity, like you mentioned, like the dads are like, well, I've seen a lot of moms and moms groups say like, well, my husband doesn't get up with me because I'm the one breastfeeding. So there's no reason for him to get up. He might as well get rest because he's got work to do. And I'm like, so do we. Like as women raising children, like we are also working. We are also helping. Our rest is just as important. And something that I felt really seen in during that time was when I would get up, my husband would get up with me.
Really?
And even though it was just, yes.
Wow, that's really nice. Good job, Alex.
Even if it was just a few minutes, like of just like, hey, I see you. Do you need anything from me? Are you all set up? Do you have a snack? Do you have your water? Okay, I'm going to go back to bed. If things are overwhelming, like my phone's on, text me, call me, like I will come in and take over.
Wow.
Really nice to have. And so it's just that thinking of like, what does this person need to be successful and how can I meet them where they're at as a partner, as a spouse, as a friend? Maybe you're listening and you're a mother-in-law. Like that's where we need you to come in, is in the places where it's the assist, not don't take over. Come in and assist.
Oh my gosh. Well, Meghan, this has just been fantastic and so helpful. I so wish I'd have met you before I had my two girls. Everyone needs a Meghan.
Yeah. So speaking of, how can people find you, Meghan? Like share with our audience the best way to get in touch with you.
Absolutely. I think probably the easiest way is either through my website, which is milkandmotherhoodlactation.com. And then you can also find me on Instagram, which is milkandmotherhood.llc. I think that's what it is. Isn't that awesome?
We will link.
We will. Yes, don't worry.
I think that's what it is. I also do have a support group on Facebook. That's Milk and Motherhood Lactation. There's only about 150 moms, I would say, in there, but it's a great resource for families to be a part of. And then I also am so with my private practice, I'm a subcontractor with there's 6 other IBCLCs. So we all work together, but we're all throughout the United States. And that's meg@breezybabies.com is my email. And I think that's probably one of the easiest ways to reach out is by email. I usually will see it. And then also on my website, my phone number is on there too. So if somebody's like, hey, I need some help, send over a text anytime. And I usually will get back as soon as possible.
And that brings us to the end of another episode of the Momversation Club.
And if you've enjoyed today's show, which we hope you have, please don't forget to subscribe, like, and leave a review. Your support helps us reach even more moms and build a stronger village.
Until next time, bye from us.